Well, this is week 6 of the series. I literally cannot. And for some people, I've heard some feedback like these are, they have enjoyed some of the sermons, or the sermons have really informed them. And like I said at the beginning, at the onset of this, is a lot of this is more teaching than it is sermon, but it is all biblically based. And one of the reasons we do this is because, unlike maybe 20 years ago when we would have a Sunday morning service and a Sunday night service and then a Wednesday night study and then like Sunday school, you would have an opportunity to engage these issues. But with just kind of the current state of the church, and not just our church, but church at large and people's time and attention and all the different things that go on in the world, is that we have to, as a church, just be creative in our ways to bring teaching and sermon and kind of mix those things together. And so that is the purpose for this. And this series is largely based on the book, The Problem of God by Pastor Mark Clark. But really, it's just a series of what's often called apologetics. Apologetics is the idea of understanding and defending our faith. And one of the things that we talked about way back in week 1, if you were here, and I'll remind you even if you were here, and I'll tell you fresh if you weren't here, is that we believe you don't have to check your brain when you enter the church door. It doesn't mean you can't think. It doesn't mean that science all of a sudden goes on the shelf. It means that we engage these things in thoughtful and rational and reasonable ways. But in the last few weeks that we've talked about kind of those many topics that become hurdles to people that are maybe they'd be interested or open to faith, but there are just certain hurdles they can't get past because in their mind they just can't reconcile the two. And so part of the reason that we do this, and one of the reasons, is that not only to let you know in case you had these questions, but also to equip you with information so you can engage other people that you might run into with these questions or with these hurdles that have become a problem to them going all in on their faith in Jesus Christ, or maybe even come to know that there's God. And so we covered issues of science, we covered the problem of pain and suffering, the hurdles of hypocrisy, even God's existence. Last week we talked about the hurdle of sex and the church's view on that. And really, as we move into this week, it's just a reminder that there are people that you see every single day, as long as you leave your house, and maybe even within your house, but at least if you leave your house, that 2 out of 3 people that you see in this community generally have said that they have no religious affiliation. Not just that they're not Christian, it's no religious affiliation. And so we've talked about that 2 out of every 3. And so the next time you go to a school function, or the next time you go to the store, or you go to work, or even if you're driving down the highway or whatever else, that 2 out of the 3 people you see, you can just count on, the numbers are going to bear out that they have no affiliation with God. And so we believe that God's mission for us, part of the mission for us as part of the global church of Jesus Christ, is to share the gospel in meaningful and impactful ways to those 2 out of 3 people that point to a new life in Jesus Christ. Now, sometimes we think if we just hold up the truth that they should respond, and we'll keep hitting them over the head until they respond. But actually, Jesus said, do you remember when Jesus did the high priestly prayer? For those of you that would know that, he said, this is the way that they will know that you are this is the way that you will know that you're my disciples. Was it by being right? Love. He says, by love that they will know you are my disciples. That's what he said. Someone said actions, and I think the action of love. Love is an action, not just a feeling, so that was a good answer too. Those work together. But that's what it is. And sometimes we get caught up in having the right idea and being right and winning an argument when Jesus is concerned about making us right, and that we might live right and be made right through His Holy Spirit. And so we recognize that there are hurdles that people have, and we could probably spend a year going through those things of just different reasons that people might have. But the last one that we're going to address today is the hurdle of exclusivity. And exclusivity just means that nothing else is correct except this one thing, right? So truth is exclusive by its very nature, right? 2 plus 2 is 4. How many of you agree with that? I don't see every hand. What does everybody else think 2 plus 2 equals? But by its very nature, that's exclusive, right? 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 5. 2 plus 2 doesn't equal purple. 2 plus 2 doesn't, that's truth absolute truth, by its very nature, is exclusive. And so the problem I think we have with truth, though, at times, and the problem that people have reacted to at times, is that at times that we want to be kind to people, we want to show love, as Jesus said, while wrestling with the idea of absolute truth, because there'll be people that says that's not true, and we're trying to say, yes, it is. And so sometimes we get caught in the competition of proving we're right rather than still remembering to show love. Now, this comes out of a general uncomfortableness with the ways that truth has been used in the past. People have used the truth to support ideas that you'd say, that doesn't line up. And so that makes us uncomfortable because people have used it to abuse other people. There's people that have used the truth of the Bible to say, oh, one race is better than another race, or to say some people are more deserving of grace than other people. And so we react negatively to ways that which supposed truth was used to bring harm to people. And so what happens is people will back off of that because we're saying, man, people used the truth as a weapon to harm other people. And so sometimes what happens is we, just by our culture and that kind of stuff, we are people that don't like to live in the tension of believing in the truth and being graceful, because that takes some tension and you have to walk that line kind of on both sides, and it's kind of tough. And so instead of because we've seen the negative that was done with truth, we swing the other way and we swing to relativism and inclusivism. Relativism says what you believe is right for you, while what I believe is right for me. It's all relative, right? And if you have relatives, you know most of them are perfectly right. That's a joke. With Thanksgiving coming up, it's just, a little early. Yeah, thanks, Larry. I'll pay you my $1 afterwards for laughing at my joke. But really, relativism is the idea that, hey, whatever, it's relative to you. Truth is relative to you. Inclusiveness says that every thought is equally valid and true. Here's some quotes about this problem of exclusivity that we have. Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, he says this: I am absolutely against any religion that says one faith is superior to another. I don't see how that is anything different than spiritual racism. That's his position. You know Gandhi, or I've heard of Gandhi. He says, my position is that all great religions are fundamentally equal. And the great philosopher Oprah Winfrey, she said, one of the biggest mistakes humans make is to believe there's only one way. Actually, there are many diverse paths leading to God. This is the type of thinking that sounds like a good way to get along with everybody, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, that's one of those ways you say, excuse me, and it's a good way to get along with everybody. It feels good to validate every belief and idea as true. It doesn't feel good to say there is truth and that truth is only in this one particular belief. That feels you're pushing people away. In fact, we know that everything that feels good isn't necessarily true or good. Have you ever had something and you thought it was going to be so good, and then you got down that path like, oh, that wasn't good at all? Or it was good in the moment, but the lasting effects were not good. We know that, right? Yeah. The reason we don't feed our kids ice cream and candy for every meal is because it sounds good to them, right? You ever met a kid that didn't want candy and ice cream every meal? It would taste like a party to them, and we would have no problem getting them to eat. We would just put it there, and we wouldn't have to say, now come on, eat your dinner or clean your plate, right? But they'd probably end up with diabetes by the time they're like 15. Not to mention the times, I don't know how many times you've been with kids, especially when they're younger, and it's like Halloween night or some other time when they get all this candy, and they eat through everything, and they start jumping around, and then what happens? The thing that was so good, that tasted so good in the moment, ended up not being good for them. So parents sometimes, guess what you get to do? You get to be the bad guy. and say, hey, you think this is good for you, but I'm trying to offer you some wisdom that says what looks good, even what tastes good, is not ultimately good for you. And so instead, what do we tell them? Eat your vegetables. You get protein, you get grains, not because it feels so good and not because they're asking for it. Like no kid is sitting there saying, please give me broccoli and Brussels sprouts. I mean, there are probably some of those kids, but generally speaking. But we don't do it because it sounds so good to them. We do it because it is good for them, right? I think part of the reason in our culture that we have this problem and this struggle with kind of holding these ideas in kind of like tension of one another is that we've confused cultural pluralism. Easy for me to say, right? Cultural pluralism. Cultural pluralism, okay. Pluralism on a cultural level. How about that? That's easier for me to say. Pluralism on a cultural level allows for and celebrates people of different cultures, races, religions. It says like, oh, that's cool. You have a different thought. You have a different experience. You're different than me. Like cultural pluralism that is cultural is one of those things that we can celebrate that and say, hey, you're different. That's cool. But we've confused that with what would be called metaphysical pluralism or spiritual pluralism, which accepts as true all diverse ideas, worldviews, and convictions of people and religions. So those two things are different, but sometimes we confuse them and think to celebrate difference, we have to accept everything they say as true. Cultural pluralism is good and necessary, but metaphysical or spiritual pluralism is a disaster. It really is. All beliefs cannot be true without altering what they said they believe, including Christianity. You cannot say, I'm a Christian and follow Jesus Christ, but all these others are probably true too, or are true. You can't say they're not all true. It just doesn't work that way because Jesus, who actually, it's named after, Christianity is named after Jesus Christ. Jesus is talking to the disciples and he describes his Father's house and he's saying there's many rooms and he said, I'm going to go prepare them for you. This is in John chapter 14. In John chapter 14, we get into, starting with verse 3 through verse 6, here's what we read. It says this, when everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am. And you know the way to where I am going. No, we don't, Lord, Thomas said. We have no idea where you are going, so how can we know the way? Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. Who can come to the Father except through him? No one. Right? People love the idea of Jesus. Many people say that he was a great teacher, but they don't like the idea that he is the only way. The hard part is that Jesus said it. It's not like we're just making it up, like, oh, I like his idea, so I think he's the only way. It's that he actually said, I am the only way. No one comes to the Father except through me. And it even makes some of us uncomfortable with the idea that he says this. But we don't see Jesus having a problem with that. He just says it. And he says in other passages too. And so what happens is the disciples, they didn't have a problem with this either. You get to Acts chapter 4, we see the disciples didn't have really a problem with that as Peter is answering a question from the rulers of the Jewish people in those days, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. If you remember, they're kind of brought before the temple people, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They're brought in front of them. And in verse 7 of Acts chapter 4, here's what Peter says. They brought in the two disciples and demanded, by what power or in whose name have you done this? They're saying, why have you done this thing? Who has given you the authority? Who has given you the power? They're asking him a very directed question. And Peter answers and says, basically, Jesus, the guy that you all crucified, was resurrected. And then he goes on to say this in verse 12, there is salvation in no one else. God has given no other name under heaven by which we must be saved. We see this conviction for truth while still being loving and gracious. Jesus, full of grace and truth, says, I am the only way. That's what he says. Now, he doesn't run around and beat people over the head with it. And the people, if you remember, that Jesus got into kind of contentious discussions with were always the religious people. What's funny in our world today is that the people that we most often get into arguments with, it seems like the people that we as a church, I don't mean people in this church, just the church in general and outside of this church, not even you watching at home, it's other people, right? But a lot of times what you see, and I'll see from Christians, is that the people they're arguing with are people that don't believe. And so it's kind of interesting, because that's not Jesus' strategy. Jesus' strategy was always grace but truth with people that didn't believe. And then with the religious people, he was a little more like, hey, here's what it's supposed to be. But there's still a conviction of Jesus, not to sugarcoat it, not to say, hey, this isn't true, or hey, believe whatever you want. He says, I am the only way. Richard J. Mao, I think is how you say his name, he says, it is one thing to insist that other people have the right to express their basic convictions, right? That would be like the idea of free speech. Everyone has the right to free speech from the government, that they can express their basic convictions. It is another thing to say that they are right in doing so. There's a difference in that, right? We need, I think, as Christians, to learn to disagree with civility. And although things like social media, texting, and even if you're old enough to still email, these things seem to have only made our difference of opinion that much more apparent, right? There's things that people will post, there's things that people will text that they would never say standing 6 feet away from that person. They just wouldn't. It's easy to be brave behind a keyboard or behind a phone. And we in the church, unfortunately, have fallen into this trap. Someone recently posted on Facebook, of all things, they said, a lot of times we say, we're just fighting fire with fire. You know who doesn't use the strategy of fighting fire with fire? The fire department. They know better. But we sometimes can't seem to get in our head like, well, they did it first. The reality is Jesus looks to draw people in love to overcome the divide, is how Jesus came to do it. God so loved the world that he sent his only son. God so, what the world? Love the world. And so not that we can't have truth, but truth always has to be paired in love. We really need to be able to disagree without bludgeoning people over the head with the truth of the word. We can share the truth of the word. We can say, here's what Jesus says. But if someone doesn't claim to even love Jesus or know Jesus, sometimes that's not very effective. But we should be able to be, as people, disagree with people and still be civil. And say, hey, I don't agree with you, but we can still be friends. We don't need to get upset and walk away or eject from a relationship simply because we don't agree with a person. Simply because they don't agree with us. Let's be honest, we as a culture aren't particularly great at disagreeing and still staying together. You know what's interesting is if you look up the way that social media works, and I know like maybe I'm preaching to the choir or people that don't really use social media very much, but the way that it works, the algorithm in it, looks for people that say the same things you do. And so what that's called in any other form is called an echo chamber, where you say the same thing that somebody else says, and so you're hearing voices that all agree with you. So it's not very hard to not have disagreements when you're in that situation. But we in the church like to claim that Christianity at times looks more like the culture than we should. Michael Frost said this, if Christian unity can only be maintained at the expense of people holding divergent views, it's a cult, not the beautiful new way of being human that Jesus taught us. Michael Frost said that. He's an author. A lot of times people say, I don't want to go to any church where there's conflict or where there's disagreement. That's a church of one. That's like saying I don't want to live in any house without conflict. Well, unless you're living on different floors, there's going to be conflict. That's just the way of human beings trying to figure out life and bumping up against each other and accidentally doing things even with the best intentions. There's biblical precedent for people saying we can't agree on what to do next, and so we're going to go our own ways but still trust and love that you're a Christian. And so we need to learn to disagree but move forward together in love. Right? We all have preferences for things, and that's okay. But if we focus on the person of Jesus Christ, then we should come to realize that our opinions and our preferences, although fine, are always secondary and often need to die out to the unity of the primacy of Jesus Christ. That's what it is. Let me give you an example of something of how this works sometimes in the church. Somebody will come and ask me, how do you think we should decorate the church, the front of the thing for Christmas? It's been asked of me. And I say, if you're willing to decorate the front of the church, then I think whatever way you're going to do it is going to be awesome. And that's really true. I might have opinions on how I might do it. You might have opinions on how you would do it. Unless it's scriptural, like my opinion, I think like it doesn't have to win out. The point to me is like the church gets decorated for Christmas. I think that's great. We should celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. How it happens and how it looks within reason. I mean, there are bounds to that. Like there are some things where I might be like, that's an interesting choice. But generally speaking, like it doesn't have to be my preference on how we decorate for Christmas. Now, if we want ideas, we want to share it. And so there have been times when there's been disagreements in people setting things up. And they'll say, what do you think, Pastor? And I'll say, okay, if you cannot come to an agreement and you need some, like a tie-breaking vote, I'll voice my opinion. Otherwise, you're doing a great job. And I'm not just saying that to avoid hurting someone's feelings. It's really because my preferences about how you decorate the church to me are always secondary or even third or fourth or fifth to the primacy of Jesus Christ. And so the mission of God, to me, is more important than where trees go and all this other stuff. Not that stuff's unimportant, but always the mission of God of revealing the love of Jesus Christ and feeding the sheep and reaching new people for Jesus are always primary, Jesus is always primary, and these other things are always secondary. I always have preferences. We all do. We're human. We have opinions on everything. Anybody not have an opinion on anything? I would say check their pulse, right? We all have opinions, and they're fine, but they're not primary. Jesus is primary. And the sooner I think we understand that within Christian circles, then I believe the sooner we start to live it outside of those Christian circles as we encounter people who think differently. Jesus didn't say, get everybody to think right or enforce laws to make everybody live right. He said, introduce them through love to the person that can make them right. We don't have to abandon truth to love somebody, and we don't have to abandon love to believe in the truth of Jesus Christ. Actually, the idea that we're all correct and all truths are the same endangers us because it leaves us on the surface level. I mean, if all religions and thoughts and beliefs are pretty much the same, why do we need to dig in and research what it is that any religion believes? You wouldn't have to, right? And that's sometimes what people will say, religion's fine, but they're all pretty much the same. Sometimes that can be a really lazy way of saying, I don't really want to research it. And so the question we have to wrestle with is, are we sacrificing eternal answers to significant questions about life simply because it helps us keep and maintain social order and peace? Now, don't hear me say in this that tact doesn't matter. Anybody know what tact is? Yeah. The way you speak to someone. Timing is a matter of tact, right? Like if you're in line and someone has a loved one that just passed away and you're coming and greeting them and telling them sorry for their loss, that's probably not the best time to hit them up for $5. That's tact. That's an exaggerated view of tact, right? Like you don't do that. How you speak to someone, how you show respect. So there's a difference between that and having tact. Tact in the way to approach certain things matters. But that doesn't mean that you defer and never say anything until Jesus comes back because it might rock the boat. I've had discussions with people and they said, oh, my kids are doing X, Y, and Z. And I say, oh, what'd you say to them? I said, I didn't say anything to them. I said, why not? And they said, I don't want to make them upset. Okay, that's one approach. And I get that sometimes might not be the best time to say it, but using tact and understanding and the relationship you have at times will earn the right to speak into someone's life, and they can take it or leave it. Inclusivism, and many would say that all religions are pretty much the same, or even that all religions are true. But that's a lot like week 1 of the 2018 NFL season. You see, people come to me and say, oh man, these last 3 to 5 seasons as Bears fans, they've been really tough. I kind of chuckle and ruffle their hair. And I say, let me tell you what tough looks like. And I tell them what it's like to be a Cleveland Browns fan, who haven't just had a rough 3 to 5 seasons, they've had a rough 3 to 5 decades. But in week 1 of the 2018 NFL season, the Browns did their absolute best not to lose. And they had been on a 650-plus day losing streak because they were 0-16 the year before. And guess what? Week 1 of 2018, they didn't lose. But you know what else? They didn't win. They tied. This is a confusing place to be as a fan, it can be. Because you can't be too happy because you didn't win, but you aren't super upset because, hey, at least you didn't lose, especially with the number of days, because it's the first time in a very long time that you didn't lose. That's a lot like relative inclusivism that says all religions tie. They're all equal. None are wrong, but hey, none of them are exactly right either. But once you get beyond kind of the golden rule, you can begin to see just how different religions are. Not only for Christianity, which we already said, hey, its founder Jesus said no one comes to God but by him, but the truth is it believes in a Trinitarian God. Islam and the Jewish faith, they believe in a Unitarian God. And they believe Jesus was a nice guy or a prophet or a good teacher, but not anything beyond that. Buddhism doesn't even necessarily believe in God, they just believe in nirvana, which is a state of mind. And don't forget religions like the ancient Ammonites that you read about in the Bible. They worshiped a god named Moloch, and he demanded that children be burned alive. Is that valid and the same? Is that the same religion as Christianity? Is that the same as these others? Or anybody ever heard of Jim Jones? Jim Jones, a couple of you remember him? He had very odd beliefs, but he got a following, and he convinced about 900 people to kill themselves with Kool-Aid. You ever heard that saying, don't drink the Kool-Aid? That comes from Jim Jones, just in case you didn't remember that or didn't know that. But he got them to do that. Is that true and valid? What about David Koresh? Many of you remember David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. At some point, we have to come to the term that not all religions and the way they play out are basically the same. And even if we were to limit it to major and current religions, as we begin to dig into each of these religions, we soon will come to understand that most of these religions are about the things we do to prove to God. Oops, sorry, wrong slide. Most of these religions prove that we have to do the right things to prove to God that we're worthy of salvation. That's what most religions do, is the idea of like, you have to achieve a higher goal. All the while, Christianity stands over here and says, it's not about what you can do, it's actually about a person, Jesus Christ, who despite our unworthiness, provides salvation to us. That's the difference. Some people have this kind of word picture of there's a mountain and God is at the top. And most religions and even schools of thought, because what do most people say? If you say, where are you going to go when you die? And they say, I don't really know, but I'm a pretty good person. And so I think God will see that and he'll let me go to heaven. What that view of as heaven is God is at the top and we kind of work our way up. But every time we mess up, we slip back down. And we work our way up a little bit more and we work our way down. We're saying, man, I'm pretty good. How do we know we're pretty good? Because we look around and see everybody else, right? So it's all relative, it's comparative. Like we look over there and say, well, I'm doing better than that person. I didn't kill anybody this week, even when I felt like it. I'm doing pretty good. Then we see somebody else and they're way up there and we're like, that's just a saint. We're never going to reach that level. But hey, compared to the rest of these yokels, I'm doing pretty good, right? And that's what a lot of people think. We're comparative. It's all comparative. Christianity is the only one where God comes down and takes you to the top of the mountain. It's the only one. He does it for you. He's saying you can't get up there. You can never live up to it. And it's not anything against you. It's that sin has so corrupted you that your ability isn't about your ability to be better. It's about my ability to be joined to you and to transform you and to change you in your behaviors and what you do. And so sometimes when I preach about, hey, our behavior should change, the way we think should change, it's because that's what God came to do, is change us and draw us to himself to be more like him, because Jesus demonstrated what it's like to be human in the reflection of God. And that's what we're invited into. It's not just about, okay, I agree that God is God. It's about actually then responding to the grace of God by living differently because we've been changed. And so while other religions and other thoughts say just be the best person you can and hope that you get in, like there's some imaginary line and threshold, Christianity is about what he did to provide salvation to you. It's saying put your faith in him. Follow him because he is the way to life. The life that you were created for. And we can either hitch our lives to him in a relationship, or we can continue to try to save ourselves. But Jesus said he is the only way. He is the truth, and he is the real light. Is that easier? No, not really. There's a cost to being a Christian. There really is. Some people believe your belief in Jesus makes you a bigot, and that your acceptance of Jesus is a rejection of them. We need to recognize that the way of following Jesus is called by Jesus the narrow way. And it is going to cost us as we surrender the self-autonomy of our lives to Jesus, who is showing the way continually. And so when you stop going whatever way that everybody else says is cool, you stop going your own way instead of going the Jesus way, it's going to exclude all other ways. Jesus said that followers of his will be like lambs among wolves. And he says, you'll follow me. Where did Jesus go in his life? Anybody know? Where did Jesus ultimately go? The cross. Jesus went to the cross. He died. So if you are a follower of Jesus, he is leading you to die to yourself, die out to your preferences, all for the unifying love of Jesus Christ and what he has done and what he continues to do for us, in us, and through us. That's what he's continually calling you to do. Yes, a prayer of salvation is great, but that gets you into the doorway to then dying to yourself and learning to live in the way of Jesus Christ. It's a continual journey. And so some people say, you know what? I'm going to put my feet up because I gave my life to Jesus. That's not what it says in Scripture anywhere, let alone Jesus. He doesn't say, pick up your cross and follow me daily to the sofa. He says, pick up your cross and follow me. And the reality of it is it can cost you friends. It can cost people to make fun of you. It will cost people it will cost you in how you live your life. It'll cost you in what you prefer to do and how you prefer to spend your money, what you prefer to do with your time, because you believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. It is going to take courage, but it will be hard to move out of your comfort zone because he hasn't called you to your comfort zone. He has called each of us to the Jesus zone. Someone wrote a song about it a few years ago, and it was called The Danger Zone. Okay, they didn't really write it about that, but that's what I'm saying. That's my take on it. Because it's not always safe. It's not always easy, but it is good and it is right. There's a scene in the cartoons that my kids like, and I like it too, but this movie, it's called The Incredibles. And they have this boy, and his name is Dash, and he has super speed, right? He can run really fast. And his mom keeps telling him, Dash, just keep that under wraps. Don't let people know you can run really fast. And so he's driving home from school because he does all kinds of things and gets into trouble, as boys sometimes are known to do. And he's complaining that he shouldn't have to hide that he is special. And his mom says, everyone is special. And Dash says, that's just another way of saying no one is special. There is courage in Christianity. There is cowardice in saying nothing is true or everything is true. reasonably and relationalistically, that's the word I want to use, we can't hold everything to be equally true. We can allow for diverse thoughts and beliefs, and we need to be civil in our conversations of those thoughts and beliefs that are different than ours. But we do not have to say we are all equally right just to simply get along. I want to encourage you to do your own research into your faith positions and things you've been taught. One thing you can do is pick up a book like this that the series is somewhat sourced from, which is The Problem of God. There's other books like The Case for Christ or The Case for Faith or The Case for, there's no shortage of books that are apologetics. If you Google apologetics books, you can probably find a lot of them. There's movies about it and all kinds of other things. But my challenge to you is we've just gone through a 6-week series and we only scratched the surface. We've kind of gone with the most popular ones. But these books will dig into areas that we've talked about and lots of areas we didn't talk about. But my encouragement for those books isn't just so you can be more prepared. The overall encouragement, though, is to go all in on Jesus. To go all in on Jesus. This series has been designed to answer questions and help with any doubt and traverse hurdles that might have gotten in the way of complete faith, and equip you to speak more intelligently about your faith with those who hold different ideas and opinions. But if all you did was learn information, if all you did was learn facts, then let me encourage you to let that make a difference in how you live and believe by surrendering your life to Jesus Christ. The problem that we have sometimes is that we want to convince people that we're right and get them to think differently. But if people think differently, but they don't know Christ, then what have we really won? Nothing. Jesus came to save people. Will the way they think change? Sure. But he came for more than just their thought life. He came for their actual life and the eternal life. Jesus said he was the only way. He was the way to the Father. Be encouraged to go all in on Jesus. To realize that in Jesus Christ, you are accepted, you are forgiven, you are reconciled to God, and you will be adopted as a child of the Creator of the universe. All because of your great person. No. All because of what Jesus has done for you and is doing for each of us continually. And that's where the problem of exclusivity can in turn become the salvation of Jesus. It doesn't have to be a hurdle to faith. It can just be the path to be made right in Him. So I encourage you, if you have not gone all in on Jesus, in our tribe, in our kind of way that we talk about it in the Church of the Nazarene, going all in Jesus is called being sanctified. Sanctification is the process by which the Holy Spirit cleanses us from that kind of holding on to our right to be in charge of our life and surrendering it all to God and saying, you are my Lord, whatever you want from me, no matter what it will cost me, I would give my life for you. You gave your life for me, Jesus. I will gladly surrender the rest of what I have left of this life to you from this point forward. And that's what it is. That we are led by the Spirit. Will you stand with me?